Hello and welcome to Screen Time. Today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Teacher. It is written, directed, and screenplayed by Vivek. The movie stars Hakeem Shah and Amala Paul as the major couple, the protagonists around which our entire film is situated. It is a revenge thriller, it's a revenge plot, and it is dealing with the story of rape. And now I have to say, spoiler alert from this point forward. Now, this movie opens with a very interesting sequence of a police officer approaching a child who has been the victim of a molestation. The police officer has the FIR read out in front of the child and the parents in a hospital. From the get-go, we know that in this world that they are creating, there is bad people and there's good people, and there is no justice in the middle of this. You see the parents of the child struggle a lot while the police officer reads out a very detailed FIR about the molestation that took place. And then he proceeds to say, you know, your life will be ruined, your child's life will be ruined, so better not make this a police case. And the scene kind of ends there. For me, that scene becomes the crux around which the rest of the movie is kind of set. We're going into a household of a married couple. They've been married for about 4 to 5 years. They're struggling to have a child, and they're eagerly waiting. The husband is a typical power man. He's a religious man. He works at the hospital, and the woman is a teacher. She's a hardworking, very committed teacher who teaches sports and other things at a local high school. Teacher ends up at a junction in her life where she gets brutally assaulted, raped, and her life kind of changes upside down. In the story, you see that she's been roofied, and the entire incident takes place during a sports festival. What we see in the movie is from that point on, where she has woken up after this assault, and she has to now deal with the reality of what has happened. Because she was roofied, she doesn't even know if it really happened, so she has to now find out if what she thinks has happened has actually taken place, and then move forward to see how she wants to deal with this incident that has occurred. Here, what becomes very interesting is the woman does have a lot of agency in this film. You see her from the get-go kind of curious and kind of at the forefront of this discussion of what happened to me, what happened to my body, what am I going to do about it. She is not a victim in its typical portrayal on visual media. She's a strong woman. She's a sports person. She's got a lot of rigor. She's a teacher. And she's very much out to get the person that has caused harm to her. What becomes strange in the film is, unfortunately, the way this plays out. Now, this crux in itself is quite exciting, but the way that the screenplay is done and the writing is done kind of falls flat here and there. I'm interested, in the beginning, but then there's so much going on. There's so much of background that I don't get till way in the end, and this non-linear storytelling. Things kind of fall flat. Halfway through, I know that it's predictable that, hey, she's going to get justice in the end out of her own power. But where are we going to, be in the meantime? So getting from the beginning of the movie, where I was super excited, and the end that I know is coming, was a bit of a struggle. What really works in this film is the fact that it exists in the real world. Like the previous scene in the beginning, where, you see the child and the police and the parents, the entire movie does address the fact that it is situated in a world that has caste, that has gender, that has other political narratives. We see a very powerful speech by an excellent Manju Pillai, who plays the character of our protagonist's mother, and she delivers a very powerful monologue, and she's a Communist Party leader, and we see them fighting for the land rights in Manro Turta. Now, these are things that we know of, things that we have heard and seen in the news and in history, and that's very nice. The fact that this woman and this husband and their life is existing in reality, in a familiar reality. Because it is situated in that reality, a lot of the real world can seep in and out of the story. And that really has been played with very well by the writer-director. What works is the fact that, the couple that's trying to get pregnant, the husband in the narrative, he's dealing with a lot of stigma in terms of fertility, in terms of his masculinity, his manhood, and his friend who doesn't add a lot to, help him. There's this social commentary of what happens when something like this, an assault or a rape, enters an existing reality. The rape is not the only thing we know about them. We know that there's all these facets to their life, and how do they navigate all of it amidst a tragedy of this sort. The fact that as a result of the rape, spoiler alert, she conceives, she gets pregnant. And then there is this narrative at his workplace that the husband now, got a trophy for free. Now, all of these things, it's interesting because you're looking at the characters have multiple dimensions. They're not just victims of an assault and now, oh no, how do I get out of this? Oh no, how do I take revenge? They have a lot more layers, like layering that's being done to kind of see how they exist in time and space. The character of the husband has been played very well by Hakim Shah. He gives a very earnest performance and does a really good job at portraying a regular Malayali man who is dealing with multiple issues with his friend, with his workplace, with his masculinity, and then having a wife who has now gone through something very, heavy. How do you deal with that? He does play the kind of unlikable character where he is not supportive, he is not understanding. He immediately makes it about him. He immediately reacts to it in the way that you only hear about in nightmares, and he kind of gets thrown at with dialogues like, oh, you gave her too much freedom and that's why this happened to her, or that why did you let her get out, or why don't you know how to control your woman? This wouldn't have happened if that was the case. And he falls prey to it. He does believe these things. He does think that his wife was given way too much access to the world, and that's why now the world has treated her badly. And that's interesting, the fact that they're not sugarcoating how an incident like this will get received at home. In any other scenario, in any other movie, I can imagine if the woman shows up at home and says, hey, I have been assaulted, the rest of the movie is now going to be the husband taking revenge on, the victim, on the villains. In this movie, that's not what happens. The woman now has to stand up for herself and she has to now go fight the villains. The police are not a help. Her husband is also not a help. Who does become a help, though, is her husband's mother, who again, played by Manju Pillai so powerfully, becomes a shoulder, a pillar of strength for Amla Paul to now become, the kind of strong, the kind of strong character that she needs to go ahead and seek revenge. At one point in the movie, there's even a dialogue where she says, oh my God, what kind of things are women doing these days to get revenge? And then the man goes and says, yeah, you never know. Some days it's acid, some days it's bombs. A lot can go wrong. And that's exactly what happens. For the rest of the film, you see a very mass movie, action-packed climax sequence where the woman then ends up beating, a bunch of people to pulp. And she somehow has a background in like karate, and she's ready, right? She's ready for this moment to now confront her, villains and beat them to a pulp. The problem with this film is the dialogues, and another problem with the film is the fact that Amala Paul, unfortunately, is not very believable as this character. She does genuinely try. She's giving a very earnest, hard-worked process, and she's really giving it as much as she could, but something about the way words come out of her mouth just doesn't feel natural, especially in a film where there's very strong performances by all of the supporting cast. Her husband, all the way to her best friend, all the way to all the villains, everybody is really fitting into this universe. But Amla Paul kind of sticks out. And that, for me, made me a little disconnected from the emotional track of the story. What does work, though? I feel like if this was any other movie where a man suddenly, an ordinary man, suddenly starts, beating people to a pulp in the climax, I wouldn't have winked. I would have just, digested that without a lot of difficulty. But because it's a woman doing it, immediately I felt a little, oh God, is that really happening? Or I felt a little taken out of the story. And maybe that's the point, right? Maybe I, as an audience, should also get used to the fact that mass action sequences are not, reserved just for the Mammootties and Mohanlals. Even an Amla Paul can now suddenly become a karate champion and beat all these men to a pulp. It is exciting. That last sequence was quite a mass, fun time. Things that work in the film are also the camera and the editing. The cinematographer, Anu Munteratha, and the editor, Manoj, really work in tandem to kind of bring this world together. Something about the visual treatment makes the movie very textured. The coloring and the kind of like way that you see people speak and the angles they chose to present people in really works. Specifically, Manju Pillai's character, I can't stop talking about her because I think she's loosely based off K.R. Gauriamma, who, again, is such a icon in Kerala history. So it was great to see a version of her kind of played out to a point where, Manju Pillai even has a dialogue, which is a direct quote from something that Gauriamma has said in the past. Her makeup, her costume, the way she has delivered the performances, all of it, like it kind of, she is a hero in the film. Another hero moment, and she is kind of given a hero entry as well. Another hero entry is also given to I.M. Vijayan, who comes in with a massive, beautiful entry to play Amla Paul's father. You see a past where, the father and the daughter have a moment. And these two scenes of Manju Pillai and her kind of situation and I.M. Vijayan's entry are actually the highlights of the film. But I had a really good time at these 2 points. Unfortunately, though, they don't show us enough about it. I Am Vijayan comes for this mass opening and he leaves. We don't get anything more from him. Manju Pillai also, you see her in bits and pieces to anchor Amala Paul's journey, but you don't really see more of her. And I wish that's the movie I want to watch, right? I want to watch a movie where Manju Pillai in that role is the central character. That's the movie that I am here for. It'll be a great time. This movie was a fun watch because it was kind of dealing with a very real scenario of a teacher getting assaulted by her students. The concept of roofing, the concept of coming back home, not remembering what happened to you, not even realizing if it actually happened or not. And of course, having no proof, nobody believing you, nobody even interested to help you, and being helpless and lonely in this scenario is something that is very real and very much emotionally connected to, I think, everybody watching. But the writing and the dialogues, and unfortunately, Amala Paul makes this a little bit of a hard palate to digest. It didn't make me cry. And I know it sounds a little obnoxious, but a movie like this in any other scenario would have made me cry. It is so close to the reality of somebody like me, but it didn't hit me like that. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that's my problem, or maybe it's something that went, lost in translation from the beginning and the end of the movie. Something I was wondering about is if this film was maybe a Southeast Asian movie where it was shot in Korea or Japan, or if it was, any of that texture, maybe this would have worked. And perhaps it could also be loosely inspired by an existing film. I don't know yet if it exists, but it really had that touch of an ordinary woman who does a very extraordinary thing because something very tragic happened to her. It really feels like something that will fit perfectly into a Korean, movie visual landscape. So yeah, I don't know if this is inspired by something like that, inspired by movies that have come in the past, but it definitely had that sort of energy. It also had the energy of, let's say, a Rajnikant's movie, or or even Amla Paul's previous film in Tamil called Aadai. It has this energy of like extraordinary things happening in a very ordinary world, and they're somehow justifying it by past and sensible narrative, choices, which I don't know if I'm convinced by it, but it exists, and I'm glad it does, because maybe it'll open up more narratives within our Kerala landscape, which has more extraordinary things being done by ordinary people. So yeah, that's my 2 cents on it, and I hope we can keep this conversation going, and I'll see you next week with another film. Thank you.